Thank you so much, Robert. Robert Anderson, everyone. He's a wonderful joy and delight to have here Sunday morning. You're awesome, and we love you, Robert. We love you so much. You know what? The focus this week, we're all in this together. That's my talk title today. And we are in this together, aren't we? We're covering the second virtue of the 4 virtues from the book by Tobin Hart this month. And this week, the second virtue is heart. And what a week it has been for me to focus on the virtue of heart. Had a lot of interesting, unexpected, interesting opportunities come up this week with my beloved. And it's been a progress. It's been a journey. And I just want you to know that, when we're faced with opportunities in life and we're called to be present in ways that we had maybe not been called to be present in the past, this part of ourselves just opens up and kind of gets exposed. And then I want to tell you that when I came in here this morning, this place of love and community and support, it's all I can do right now to just not break completely open. So just bear with me, send me some love this morning, because every part of what we've experienced this week is just right here in my heart. And I don't know at this moment whether to do a cheer, whether to sit down and cry, or just sing or dance. And I imagine we're going to do all of it during the course of this service this morning. So I just want you to be aware of that I am truly wearing my heart out in the open this morning, and just be prepared for that. So there is a fundamental change in worldview that has been elbowing its way into everything from physics to business. And the bottom line of this shift is captured in the prefix of the word compassion. Come of compassion means together. We are all in this life together, aren't we? And we are going to dive deep in this service to bring out the different subtopics that Tobin Hart has spoken so eloquently about, written so eloquently about in his book, The 4 Virtues. And those subtopics are the good, compassion, empathizing, feeling, and connecting. And so the second virtue, heart. It's explored this morning through those subtopics. So heart is the physics of love, some say. Would you agree? In a way. The Little Prince, I mentioned this last week, reminds us the secret to this kind of knowing. One sees clearly only with the heart. Anything that is essential is invisible to the eyes. The heart is widely regarded as both the goal and the path to our highest possibility. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore described love as freedom. It gives us that fullness of existence which saves us from paying with our soul for objects that are immensely cheap. I'm going to read that again. Love is freedom because it gives us the fullness of existence which saves us from paying with our soul for objects that are immensely cheap. He goes on to tell us that the heart is about relationship, and that it's about meeting, it's about communication, community, and communion. We could think of meeting as a way of knowing, but this kind of knowing is different than, say, knowing how to spell something, like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. That's a certain type of knowing. How do you spell something? Now, this is a different kind of knowing that we're talking about here. This different kind of knowing is the knowing that comes from the heart, as poets and sages and lovers and mystics have been telling us for quite a long time. While modern conceptions generally locate knowing in the head, various traditions we know often identify the most essential knowing with the heart. And that's a lot of what we covered last week in our first virtue, presence. As a way of knowing, love opens the world not only to corresponding the opening within us. You see, the world opens up as we learn to open ourselves up and correspond with it, as we process it and experience it and feel it and taste it and touch it and dance with it through the heart. While intellect tends to hold, categorize, cut, and reform the world, heart knowing tends to behold it. So like we covered last week with beauty, a subtopic of presence, when we see a stunning piece of art or a beautiful natural vista, we may be captured by it for a moment without thought. We just seem to be in a kind of frequency lock as we behold what it has to offer. The gap between us shrinks, and this openness brings us a sense of appreciation and curiosity and awe. It makes us feel alive, and even more alive, when we stop to take in beauty. So the goal in this path of heart has something to do with trying to maintain that openness and freshness throughout our daily lives. Sometimes this means slowing down enough and taking the time to appreciate a moment, moment by moment, like a young child lost in looking at the clouds, or even a grown child lost in looking at the clouds, which I catch myself doing. There is no way to force this. I know you guys are with me on that. You just can't force those moments. They just kind of happen. They happen as we open up to it. We can develop graciousness towards welcoming it, though. We can't force it, but we can certainly develop a graciousness or a feeling of openness to these experiences. And I want to share, and I want to thank Marilyn Harding for this. I want to share a story that kind of points this out. So y'all go with me on this story, okay? As a bagpiper, I play many gigs. Now, this is a man telling the story. I do not play the bagpipes. I just want to clarify that. As a bagpiper, I play many gigs. Recently, I was asked by a funeral director to play by a graveside service for a homeless man. He had no family. He had no friends. So the service was to be at a pauper cemetery in the back country. As I was not familiar with the backwoods, I got lost, and being a typical man, I didn't stop for directions. I finally arrived an hour late and saw the funeral guy had evidently gone, and the hearse was nowhere in sight. There was only the diggers and the crew left, and they were there eating lunch. I felt badly, and I apologized to the men for being late. I went to the side of the grave and looked down, and the vault lid was already in place. I didn't know what else to do, so I just started to play. And the workers put down their lunches and began to gather around, and I played out my heart and soul for this man who had no family and had no friends. And I played like I had never played before for this homeless man. And as I played Amazing Grace, the workers began to weep, and they wept, and I wept, and we all wept together. And when I finished, I packed up my bagpipes and started for my car. And though my head hung low, my heart was full. As I opened the door to the car, I heard one of the workers say, "I never seen nothing like that before, and I've been putting septic tanks in for 20 years." It was so hard for me to read that story because I knew how it was going to end. So yeah, here's the worker. I ain't never seen nothing like that before, and I've been putting in septic tanks for 20 years. So therein lies one of those moments, right? The opportunity to come together, give of our gift, open up our heart, no matter what the condition may be in front of us or that we might understand or not understand. There is no judgment. There's no discrimination from the heart, is there? Whether it was a septic tank or the graveside of a homeless man, he gave of his gift, and it touched those workers, and it brought them to a place of amazing grace, and they wept. So seeing through the eye of the heart is essential, not only in human relationships, but science as well. Last week I had mentioned the Nobel laureate in genetics, Barbara McClintock, who described, when asked about her success in the field, she described, "Well, I have a feeling for the organism." With this feeling and openness, the other is no longer separate. You see, the gap between us shrinks as we become participants, not bystanders, or in her case, evaluators. She knew she had to become one with the organisms that she was working with, and that created a relationship that far exceeded any type of relationship we can have through judgment and discrimination and sizing something up. The word understanding, because this is all about getting in sync and tune and in harmony in order to arrive at a greater understanding than what we initially think that we're going for. The word understanding literally means to stand under or among, when we stretch past our self-separateness and self-interest. So now we're going to move into the first subtopic, the good. You know, there's a story that a heathen, whatever that might be, that a heathen once came to Rabbi Hillel and said that he would convert to Judaism if Hillel taught him the whole Torah while standing on one foot. Without missing a beat and apparently standing on one foot, Hillel replied, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah and the rest is commentary. Go learn it." So he converted. The familiar rule is the golden rule, and it's found across all the traditions and time as a moral touchstone for right action. The good, which is what we're talking about right now. In Hinduism, for example, they speak of this is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Around the 5th century, Confucius wrote, "Do not do to others what you do not want them to do to you." The Greek philosopher says that it says it this way, and his name is I can't say his name, Epictetus. Jacob, do you know how to say it? Epictetus. "What you would avoid suffering yourself, seek not to impose on others." This ethic of reciprocity, as the golden rule is referred to, cuts deeper still in the language of Black Elk, the Native American Sioux elder, that during the North American genocide of the 1800s, he said, "All things are our relatives. What we do to everything, we do to ourselves, because all are really one." Black Elk described not only reciprocity, but also a profound realization in unity. He took it like a next step. He started talking about the oneness and the unity. And this is why we do unto others as we would have them do unto us. He speaks of indivisibility as the source for right action. Any idea that is as universal as the golden rule comes out of our shared human experience, an outer expression of a kind of unfolding courtship, communication to community to communion. Now, the work of the heart isn't to make or even follow rules, though, is it? Golden or otherwise. You see, we couldn't possibly bring in the work of the heart to follow anything, because that's what we're going to dive into this morning. You know, when we truly follow the heart, when we allow the heart to be open and to be our guide and to give it of its wisdom to us, there is nothing to follow. But in that moment, the trueness and the pureness, the beauty, as it will, that comes from the direction and the guidance and the message of the heart. Instead, to meet the world of the heart has to meet heart. And from this meeting, we recognize one another as relatives. We recognize one another as one when we process it through the heart, when we go through it that way. Rumi pointed it out precisely to the epicenter of the good. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard this quote many, many times, but we're going to talk about it in a little bit of a different realm. You know, Rumi says, out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. He wasn't really saying there is no right doing and there is no wrongdoing. What he was really saying, he's powerfully pointing out that heretical lines that teach goodness is most fundamentally not about rules, but instead about meeting us heart to heart. It's not really about the good or the bad anymore, because when we do meet up heart to heart, there is no good or bad. Think of an instance where you are in an experience. I can say back in the days when I worked with the ex-felons who were just released from prison, there was no good or bad. There was no way I could connect with them if I still worked from that viewpoint of thinking and acknowledging people. I know I needed to meet with them heart to heart. We needed to connect on a level that far exceeds and is far greater and is far more universal than what we're talking about in regards to rules. So that's what Rumi was talking about, heart to heart. So it surely does seem sometimes that we need moral codes, doesn't it? We benefit from a rule of law, but the step in our evolution towards right action has something to do with the intelligence of the heart. And there is plenty of evidence that suggests that we have capacities for greed and for violence. We don't have to look too far to find selfish acts, especially in our history or in today's news. But there is plenty of evidence for something else that seems quite natural, even among young children. There is mounting evidence of a more loving capacity. Our birthright seems to include natural compassion, a capacity to feel sympathy for suffering and for the impulse to reach out and to help others. And how do we do that? You know, when we reach out in the feeling of compassion to help others, it's not to figure out a math problem for them, is it? It's not to discern what that extra ingredient is in that recipe. It's to reach out and connect with them and allow them to feel the love that we're holding in our heart for them in that moment. And that's a balm beyond any medicine could ever provide, isn't it? Are you with me there? You know what I'm talking about? So when someone falls in front of us or an injustice occurs within our view, we often feel a push from our insides to take action and to help. Apathy, fear, violence, self-absorption can be overcome by the recognition that suffering and the action of service goes through the open heart, when we deal with it from an open heart. So I talked about even tiny children, you know, we're just incorporated to have this feeling of love and compassion within us. The author, Tobin, speaks of his friend Stacy, who is visiting her parents' home on Thanksgiving holiday. And a large group of the family and friends had gathered, and she hadn't been there for a while. And for several years, her marriage had been falling apart and had been really difficult. And on that day, her hope and her efforts seemed to finally be exhausted. And she figured, I guess it's because I was around all those supportive family members or because I felt a sense of familiar ground in my environment. She just went and sought out an isolated room somewhere and just bawled her eyes out. She just felt that release and that knowing of something that she cherished was no longer. And she was just bawling her eyes out, and then suddenly she felt something on her knee. And one of her 2-year-old nephews had sought her out. And she said, there's no way he could have heard me, but he sought her out and placed his hand on her knee and just stood there. And she could feel the love and the understanding emanating from him, even though he was 2 years old. And there was truly no way that he could have really known what she was crying about, but he certainly knew about the balm of providing his love and his compassion for her. She said, it simply blew me away, and I have never forgotten it, and it has always stood for me as a supreme example of the healing capacity of a silent, loving presence. She had the distinct sense that he just felt her pain and reached out, an innocent heart to connect one with the other. And so we were talking about the subtopic of good. Speaking of the good, I want to ask you, and yes, we're kind of going into this area in this realm of, are you really going to go there? And I'm like, yeah, we're going to go there. So I'm going to ask you, are we endowed with sin or goodness? What do you think? Sin or goodness? Yes, Foster says. Yes. In the 4th century, there was a doctrinal debate between Augustine and a fellow from the British Isles named Pelagius, also called Morgan. Thank goodness, because I didn't want to have to say Pelagius throughout the rest of the story. Augustine made the case for original sin, that we are all born bad seeds. Anybody in this room ever heard that before? Ever? Maybe? Yeah. Morgan, although he was also quite interested in sin, believed in our perfectibility. He thought that we had a natural capacity to do good and that our work in the world was about divinization, or working towards the perfection of our being. Morgan believed that we strayed from good not because there was some inherent natural flaw in us, like Augustine thought we were just born a bad seed. He thought we strayed because we were following a bad example. It was not because of our inherent badness, but because we may be ignorant of our true nature and potential. and have trouble drawing upon the treasure of our soul, he says. In Morgan's view, to help us make the right choices, we are endowed with 3 faculties or capacities. Posse, which is natural ability or potential to do good. Vele, free will or choice. And esse, action. Like love, the good becomes a verb, an intention, and an action. The word sin comes from archery and means missing the mark, as when the arrow strays from the bullseye, implying that we are in some way living off target from our natural nature or sense of self and what is possible. Now, where have we heard that definition before? Anybody in here that has taken the foundations level classes? That is exactly how Science of Mind defines this idea and concept of sin. It's just simply missing the mark. But missing the mark of what? Of what we